Welcome to the Economic Times. Today we have Annie Kemp here with us, an economics teacher at Island School.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So Annie, what are the trade relations like between China and the United States?
So interestingly, despite Donald Trump's frequent criticisms of United States deficit with China, relations between the two countries have been proposed to be at an all-time high. This news comes after Donald Trump's and Xi Jinping's, president of China's, meeting at the Mar-a-Lago summit.
So what are your thoughts on the two countries announcing updates on an upcoming trade deal?
So this strong relationship comes as quite a surprise for many, as previously Donald Trump, the President of the United States, had previously been strongly against the immense trade deficit that the United States has with China, particularly in relation to steel. The trade between the Chinese and Americans has been rather beneficial, though, on both sides. I mean, something that Donald Trump's been quite concerned with throughout his campaigning and now his presidency is jobs. But what might come to quite a surprise for many is that the trade relationship between has supported 2.6 million jobs in the United States across industries. And so it kind of may show what a different tone towards the relationship between the two countries.
Definitely. Now we have the economist Mao Zedong here with us.
Nice to meet you today.
So Mao, how has China influenced its exchange rate?
Until 2005, China had a pegged exchange rate with the US dollar. So after 2005, China changed their policy and adopted a managed exchange rate with a trading band. So a trading band basically is the band in which the currency is allowed to fluctuate. So they started with a 0.3% trading band, and in March 2014, it was moved to a 2% trading band. In August 2015, China started devaluing its currency outside the trading band by intervening in the market.
That's really interesting. So how does China manage their exchange rate?
So China does this by maintaining strict rules for individuals and banks holding yuan, the currency of China. And thus the yuan is not considered to be fully convertible, meaning companies, individuals, or governments cannot buy and sell as much as they want. For example, investors who exchange dollars for other foreign currency, who exchange dollars or other foreign currency for yuan, must sell directly to the Chinese central bank. The central bank then incorporates that foreign currency into their foreign currency reserves. That's a large reason why China holds the largest foreign currency reserves of any other nation. It is actually a whopping $3.2 trillion US.
That's a lot.
I know, right? They use these reserves to influence the value of the currency by intervening in the foreign exchange markets. As I said earlier, they were devaluing it. So if China wants to weaken the currency, which is devaluing, they will use their yuan to buy foreign currency. And China has been lowering their exchange rates quite recently to keep their exports competitive, and as a result have amassed their large foreign currency reserves. However, if China wants to strengthen their currency, they sell their foreign currency reserves and buy their own yuan with that. While China does have a managed exchange rate, in 2016 they actually relaxed it as they want market forces to have a larger impact on the yuan, and that results in more volatile exchange rates for the yuan.
Thanks, Mao. How does China manage its currency for their benefit?
So if the dollar loses value, China buys dollars in order to strengthen the dollar relative to the yuan. They do this in order to keep their exports competitive. China is the largest exporter in the world. In order to to keep their exports competitive, their exports must be cheap as well as up to a certain standard. One way that gives China a comparative advantage over other countries for their exports is their low production costs. As living standards are far lower in China, firms can provide lower wages in comparison to countries like US. However, one method that is the fact that the yuan is partially fixed to the dollar. Thus, if they keep their exchange rate low, their exports stay cheap, allowing them to continue their strong economic growth and reduce their unemployment rate. Previously, the Chinese government has been the subject of criticism as they've manually influenced the value of the yuan to ensure that their export prices are kept low and demand remains high. As such, President Trump has expressed a significant concern over the issue, criticizing the Chinese government over their power on the exchange rate, and has since promised to reduce the trade deficit by imposing duties on Chinese imports.
And what effects could this have on the Chinese economy?
So reducing the power on the exchange rate and imposing tariffs can be detrimental to the Chinese economy. As Chinese producers specialize in manufactured low-cost goods, an increase in the price would lead to consumers purchasing goods elsewhere, as there's no longer an incentive to purchase Chinese goods. As such, demand and revenue for Chinese goods and firms will decrease. Additionally, a relaxation of the exchange rate, like they did in 2016, lowers business confidence in Chinese firms, as demand is no longer as stable and revenue for Chinese firms is prone to reducing as the exchange rate strengthens. Now, one interesting thing to note is that despite Trump's calls of the yuan being undervalued, the Chinese government had previously tried to unpeg the yuan from the dollar in 2015, and the yuan immediately plummeted. So what does this mean? It means that actually the yuan is overvalued, contrary to common belief.
That's very interesting. Thank you for your insight. Now we have a special guest here with us today, Ivanka Trump.
Hi.
So Ivanka, why was protectionistic intervention needed?
So China's producing its goods and services at a much lower price compared to the US. And with the exchange rate being partially fixed to the dollar and the lower standard of living for the workers, this allows companies in China to pay lower wages to their workers.
And what was the result of this?
So because of this, US companies can't compete with China's low cost. So a lot of US manufacturing jobs are lost as a result. So the tariff imposed against China's goods and services would help to bring back jobs in the US. And with the tariff, the US domestic goods and services will be of higher prices to consumers. So therefore, it is unlikely that the trade deficit will change.
Has there been any previous tariffs imposed against China from the US?
Yeah, about 3 years ago, the US imposed tariffs on Chinese-made tires in response to the efforts by workers in the American tire industry to prevent jobs from moving to China. So the US Commerce Department discovered that local tire manufacturers in China were being unfairly subsidized. So therefore, they placed a tariff ranging from about 17.7% to 81.3%, depending on the manufacturer.
That's very interesting. Thanks for being here with us today. Now back to join us. So Mao, how will China and the US be affected if the US imposes a tariff or other forms of protectionism on Chinese imports?
Well, the US is China's largest exporter, so it's very important for China to continue to export into the US. However, China is able to successfully export into the US as they have an absolute advantage in production. For example, US exports to China was only 116 billion, while imports from China in the US was 463 billion. So obviously we can see here that China exports a lot more than the US does. Mm-hmm. And if the US were to impose some trade restrictions on us, such as a tariff, this could be very detrimental to both us and America. For example, while domestic consumers in the US, they will have to pay higher prices as production is now being done by more inefficient American producers rather than us, the more efficient Chinese producers who are able to have a lower cost of production. So they would have less choice, less variety, and will have to pay higher prices. However, the US producers would benefit from this as they do not have to compete with such low prices, as our cost of productions have now increased due to the tariff. Therefore, domestic employment in the US would probably increase. However, employment in China would probably decrease, which is not good for us. Mm-hmm. And this is also not the best thing for the world as a whole, as it causes a global misallocation of resources, which just means that we're not getting everything done as efficiently as we can, and therefore resources are being wasted when they could be used for other things, causing opportunity costs. So I say, as a economists of China that they should not impose any tariffs. Donald Trump should not do that.
That's interesting. Thank you for joining us today.